Same street. And you have trees in where it's gonna be, you didn't see them, but I went, so they won't hear you or hear you. They have the microphone. Okay. You can speak, if you want to speak into one of these, I can turn.
Yes, yes, that would be good.
Can I hold it?
Yes.
Okay,
Maybe just. So I have more.
okay. Is this okay?
better.
Because everything I say is important and you don't want to miss a word, right?
Right.
Anyway, Andrea and I are both east side of Detroit, same street, different high schools.
Yeah.
We graduated the same year.
Yes.
And we were talking and I was telling her, Martin Luther King marched down Woodward Avenue. Thank you. Marched down Woodward Avenue in August of 1963. And I wanted to see him. And I wasn't in the march or anything, but I went downtown for, anybody know Detroit? And
Yes.
great. And I needed to be in his presence for the right that he was doing for our world. And so we were sharing that and talking about it. So lots of good, significant pieces of life history that we all share and that we all have, and that we can communicate toward bettering our society. We know it needs it. And I thank you for bringing this topic. Yes, it's very much needed. One, I'm going to do a variety of things, have a couple of brochures or table charts here, plus a couple brochures you're welcome to take with you to comprehend how pervasive this topic is. This one article I read, I've had it a couple of years, but they're talking about human trafficking is a global issue. It's a global issue, and it's a disgusting issue. And it's all about money. And human trafficking has replaced drugs as far as profitability. Isn't that amazing? Human trafficking has replaced drugs in its profitability. And nobody really is immune to having it impact their life or their awareness or their knowledge base or their culture, their society, their surroundings. This is a huge, huge issue. And a couple of books I'll leave if, here to look. This is Teresa Flores, who actually was trafficked. Some of you are aware of her. I know that some of you are in this line of work. And this is her 10th anniversary edition, telling her story. So I say to myself, what does this mean to us as a society? What does this mean to us as a society? And this one is the slave next door. It's happening sometimes right in our very own neighborhoods, and we don't know it. And the police always say, if you see something, say something. And there is a house here in Lenawee County that has bothered me when I have gone by it for a number of times, and for a lot of reasons. There's always all kinds of vehicles out, trucks, school bus, vans, cars, etc. So I went to the sheriff's office one time last year, and I expressed my concern. I said, I just needed to say this, and they did the report. What they did with it or found out is, I don't have privy to that. But I say that for all of us. This is our town, our city, our neighborhood, our county, our families. And so anytime you may or may not have some inkling that something might be going on, that's why we're talking just simply the first slide there, Human Trafficking 101. It's basic stuff, and it's all about profitability. They wouldn't be in it if it weren't for the money. It's a sad reality, isn't it? Next, please. No, I'm not going to read all of these to you because this can be available. But we have a lot of good resources right here in our county, in our town, in our city that are addressing the issues and doing various actions around helping victims, around addressing and providing counseling, clinical mental health, around providing residential treatment. And I say our home is our domicile. It's supposed to be a safe place, right? And all too often, it doesn't turn out that way. And one of the things I do when I'm giving various presentations, I hold up a picture of a bride and a groom on their happy wedding day. And then I also have a picture from a domestic violence shelter of a woman with a black eye, bruises. And my question is, how do we get from this to this? And there was one woman I worked with a few years back, and she was married, and 3 months later, she ended up in a domestic violence shelter. And I'm thinking, what's going on? Where's the communication, or where isn't there communication? One human being does not have the right on any level to control another in a negative fashion. Would you agree with that? And when I was in Macomb County for a number of years, where I worked in mental health and agency work, we had in Macomb County, our county was called Turning Point for domestic violence. Oakland County's place was called The Haven. Wayne County was called My Sister's Place. All safe places for people to go to get out of abusive situation. And I said to myself, so how come we get from this point to this point? And we have all of these phenomenal ways, and constantly we are seeing a need for clinical mental health services. We see it all the time. And at least we have a privilege of having resources available, but many of the countries around the world do not. And even though we're not perfect, we, at least in this country, have rights. We have some form of protection, which we want to acknowledge, build on, support, those types of things. And when we look at all of these various organizations right here in our area, some national, some very local, it's about, if you see something, say something. And those brochures, many of you got already, they have the local numbers, the national numbers. And even if you never find out the specifics, say something. What do you know about places, not specific, but forms of traffic patterns where it's likely to have victims available? Kathy?
You have to look for, you might see it in
where you go to get your nails done.
Yeah, okay. Salons, okay, beauty salons. That's a very receptive location and employability to keep the victims working and not saying. And I see some heads nod, and I know some of you have gotten a lot of professional background in your own work. What's another? I saw another place. Pardon? Restaurants, okay. Restaurants, absolutely. Housekeeping, absolutely. Farms. Those are a lot of places where you have traffic coming and going. People need jobs. They need to eat. They need to have some semblance of serving their families, and often they're brought in and misused. Now, not all of them, but certainly some of them. Now, my family has 2 Mexican restaurants in downtown Detroit, and we don't do that, okay? But I am aware, and I talk to my family members of things they observe and things they see and what they learn about some of their employees and what kind of situations they came from to escape their countries. So I ask that we look at this. Another big normal traffic flow is interstate highways. Bus stops, truck stops. And there's a great story I read relatively recently of a trucker. They're starting to train the trucking business and the men and women they employ, signs and symptoms of trafficking. And there was this one trucker story I read, and he pulled into a very well-known truck stop in the nation on I-80. And he just had an odd feeling because a truck parked near him. Somebody opened up a curtain and a young woman's face appeared, and she looked desperate. He said that she looked desperate. And he was trained in human trafficking. You know what the sign is? If you're being trafficked, hand, thumb. That means do that with me. Hand, thumb. And the trucker made that sign to the woman in this big semi. He did this, and she went like this. And she repeated it back. And he signaled to her. He just said, wait, and he mouthed the word wait. He immediately, in this article, called the police, explained who he was, where he was, and what he observed. And within 8 minutes, the police came to that truck stop, and they did arrest the driver of the truck and rescued that woman. So isn't that amazing? So note that, because very often people aren't going to be able to speak, but if they're in the system, they know this. Okay. How many of you, that was knowledge for you tonight? Okay. Yeah. They're learning it fast. It's being spread. And so what some groups are trying their utmost to educate the public so that even the victims can identify with that. And you can do it non-verbally, but at least you're communicating. So keep that in mind, okay? And a second one I will tell you, there is a brief video. I had a few videos I could have shown, but I thought if we talk about human trafficking, all you have to do is Google it. YouTube and Google human trafficking, you'll have PowerPoints, you'll have videos, all different lengths. But there's another short, welcome. There's another short video and another sign, which I just learned by watching that video. And there was a couple near a motel, just, and they were walking. And then there was another couple, two different races. And the second couple, she did this with her fingers. Her fingers were down and she did this. She did this at the side of her. And fortunately, the first couple that was just enjoying themselves, she saw the other woman do this. And then the second couple walked into a hotel room. And the first couple, the woman said to her boyfriend, "Did you see that? Something's wrong, something's in trouble." That woman, the first woman of the first couple, she said, "I think she's being trafficked." Apparently, that's the sign that you can say. Isn't that interesting? And she did it very discreetly with her hand down. And again, she said to her boyfriend, "Let's call the police." The police did come again very, very quickly, went up to the hotel room where the second couple was, and they showed the guy being arrested. So my friends, this is our society. This is our world. This is what we're dealing with. What can we do? We already are doing. We are educating ourselves. We are learning. But there is certainly a lot more that we can avail ourselves. We have 3 institutions of higher education in this city. That's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome. So there's lots of formalized ways of educating. Next slide, please, besides what's on here. There are many hotlines, and to national and local, and helping people understand what indeed is happening. And then providing safeguarded places to see, to learn, to broaden. I had the privilege through one of our friends, Susan Van Balen, a club member of the Adrian Dominicans. She was head of all federal prisons for 20 years. She worked for the Justice Department. And she said to me a few years ago, she said, "Pat, would you go to Texas? There's a federal prison in Dallas, Fort Worth. Would you go to prison?" I said, "No." But she said, "I'd like you to give a talk to the women. It's in a federal prison in Dallas, Fort Worth. And it's on basic 2-day workshop on communication skills, socialization." So I said, "Sure, Susan, be glad to do that." So I went down there, and that was my first time in a prison where the only thing I could go into with was my license, and so I was, we were there, and these women, and there were 45 women in their orange suits. And I said to myself, what led them in their lives to end up in this kind of a setting? And so you talk to people and stuff. And then I was there Monday and Tuesday. And the Baptists, we were going out there with the chaplains. There was a Hindu, a Buddhist, Protestant, Catholic, and the Baptists. And the Baptist minister said to me, "Pat, would you ride with me to dinner? I want to share some thoughts." So I said, "Sure." So on the way to the dinner, he said to me, "Keep on saying what you're saying." He said, "Every one of these women in this prison right now are here for drugs, money, writing bad checks, all to please their husbands or boyfriends." And he said their self-esteem is so low that they don't have an identity other than what they do to try to please their husbands, their boyfriends, their whomever. And I thought, how sad that is. And I look at the education of women and look at how kept down, stuffed down, squashed down, not able to use their God-given ability, brain, knowledge toward human betterment. And that's what we're learning tonight around this topic. What is it that we can do right here, right now? This is the only place we can be. Mary Roberts, good to meet you again. We've worked together for a long time, and I was always been energized in any encounter because of the life, the positive energy I get when I work with Mary. So that's a blessing. That's a blessing. So my friends, what is it that we can do with this knowledge? Can you go to the next slide, please? This is an overview of human trafficking and some of the insights that it is a form of modern day slavery. And it is. And we know, I grew up in the civil rights era. I loved growing up there. I learned, I studied. I was amazed at learning what humanity does to humanity. So what we're doing now today with women and children who are victims of human trafficking, it is an enslavement. And human traffic is prevalent in many countries around the world. Ironically, on this chart, and I have to say, I know we have it here, it's not as pervasive, but they have South Africa, you have the continent of Africa, you have the continent of New Zealand, some of the Asiatic countries, this war right now in Russia and Ukraine. We know that that's happening right there as Ukraine is being bombed and people have no place to go. So how it's happening in cases of human trafficking have been reported in all 50 of our states and throughout the counties in Michigan. You know how many counties we have in Michigan? 38. And there have been reported cases of human trafficking in every one of our Michigan counties. So it's here, my friends. Look at our interstate systems. Look at I-75 going from Sault Ste. Marie all the way down to Miami. Look at I-75, look at 696, I-94, all of them. It's pervasive. How come we don't see it? How come we don't know about it? Pardon?
Too many people are making money out of it.
Too many people are making money. And it's a very lucrative business. Is that the business you want to be in or know somebody who's in the business? Just think about that, how this stuff really impacts us and affects us. I had a student at Siena, and he was in the master's program, and I was going around meeting people, and this was about 10 years ago. And I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "Ukraine." And I said, "Oh, what brought you here?" And he said, "I want to get my master's degree, and then I want to go back to Ukraine to work for my government." And I had the privilege of being in Ukraine, and I said to him, "I was in Ivano-Frankivsk," which, if you know the country, it's down near Moldova. And he said, "Oh my God, you are the first American I have ever met who was been in my hometown." So we were best friends forever. And so he got his degree, and he did go back to Ukraine to work for his government. So I thought the ideas, the concepts that we can all implant in people to help them make a difference. We have wonderful, wonderful people, all ages, but our young people do want to make a difference. They don't want to inherit the world that we are living in. So we want to help them do whatever we can. And it says human traffic, as we've been saying, is a market-based economy that exists on principle of supply and demand. It thrives due to conditions which allow for high profit to be generated at low risk. So just the physical stature of children and women being controlled by large, physically overpowering men, you can see. There's another story I read of a 12-year-old girl, and she had to service 7 men from 10 at night to 8 in the morning. Can you imagine what that did to her psyche, her body, her person? She had to service, that was just a one night's work. And she described it. And I'm thinking, this is so far out of my reality, my awareness, my world, but it's going on all around us, all around. So it's our, appreciate the group pulling this evening together and all of us coming to see what we can do to address the issue, to look at it. Any thoughts, comments, questions at this point? We can have a rolling dialogue, please. Yeah.
What is the percentage of children, especially young males, that are trafficked on a daily basis?
I can't give you a precise one, but it's growing. And when you look at how boys and girls play outside, boys have more freedom to go out and hang around and be in environments than do girls. And for 8 years of my career, I directed a child sexual abuse trauma team in Macomb County. And we worked with a pedophile. And he said, he had consented to do a video with us on his life. And he grew up in a home where there was very little parental guidance. No father in the home. Mom worked 3 jobs. So he hung out at a local playground, and an older guy, whom we later found out was a pedophile, he befriended this little kid. And then after 4 or 5 visits to the playground, buying him Coke or an ice cream, it moved to the sexual molestation and then the sexual abuse and rape. And this man, my client said, he did it because it was the only time he was given personal attention and felt love. Somebody paid attention to him. Somebody cared for him. Somebody gave him things. And then as he grew, he shares his story in this video that he then molested other kids based on what he did and what he learned. So we have to look at family systems. We have to look at how we care for our children. We have to look at what we do to make available healthy, appropriate interactions for children to be children. They're not there to serve the misfitted adults in a sexual way, but more and more kids, this is happening to. So your absolute, your question, a good question on statistics, it's growing, but boys are out in neighborhoods, in society more frequently than girls. And so you can see how the pattern starts. Not a pretty picture, is it? Not a pretty picture. Was there other questions? Thank you for asking that one. Please.
My work is online in social media and that kind of stuff. And I know, especially with, like, Andrew Tate is a big example of, like, they don't all look like creeps. Like, they don't, like, traffickers don't all look like.
Would you take that off so we can
Oh, yeah.
hear? Thank you.
Sorry. So I know a lot of human trafficking now is moving towards, like, cam girls and into the online market, because it's easy to make money that way, and it's more undercover. You can just keep them in your house and you don't have to worry about them being at restaurants or going to salons or stuff like that. Do you have anything to look for when we're online and navigating that new space? What we could look for?
Mhm. Can I ask you, if you would be so kind, since you have expertise in this field, is there some advice you could share with us around this topic, around the whole social media? What the adults can do in regarding governing what their children are involved in?
Yeah, there's lots of advice I could give on that, but I mean, just being aware of who your children are talking to. Discord is a big one, and that's anyone can talk to anyone. I was really surprised when my 15-year-old told me he was in a group chat with, like, a 22-year-old. And we have the open enough communication that he was like, he talks about some weird stuff.
Mm.
And when you hear a kid say weird, you know, that's code. They don't really feel comfortable saying, like, he was talking about sexual things.
Mhm.
So I asked him, and just having that open communication and not making kids feel weird about talking about sex and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Like, just knowing that you can have that conversation with them and he's not going to get in trouble.
Ah, good.
I think that's a big thing, is knowing and being able to have a conversation and know that, like, I know with my parents, I probably would not have been able to have that conversation, because I would have been like, what are you doing in that group chat?
Yeah.
It would have been instantly, I would have been shut down and in trouble and not wanted to talk about it.
Uh-huh.
But just being aware and being open to, like, we want to shut it down. We want to jump on the kid and be like, oh, you don't talk about stuff like that. You don't talk about things like that. But having an open conversation with kids about safety online, if something makes you uncomfortable, come and talk to me about it and we'll talk about it. And I don't know, being aware, because they're going to stumble into sexual stuff online. It's not
Mhm.
barred off. It's not segregated. I remove probably 6 underage children a week from the websites that I moderate. They're supposed to be for adults, but there's no, unless other people report it, or unless I stumble across the account and I remove it myself, they're in there and they're getting into things in ways that the adults, it's just paying attention. It's not shutting it down, but it's being able to have the open dialogue with them. And
Thank you for that information, because we see how social media, and as wonderful as technology is, it's also not so wonderful on some levels. And when you see an adult, or I read these cases about somebody pretending to be a 14-year-old, I'm thinking, what's going on in that person's mind that they're soliciting underage children? And where is their developmental process? Where's their psychology? Where's their value of other human beings that they go after children? We have to look, and we do have to monitor. And as wonderful as technology is, it's also done a great disservice and has created another venue for the evil mind to function. And so as educators, as teachers, as parents, as clinicians, as whatever we're doing, as running our city, people who are running our city, what can we do? Do we have some ongoing media to help parents, to say, give them resources of shoulds and should nots as far as children are concerned? Our mental health is our future. And I look at the word mental health. We are meant to heal. We are meant to be healthy. And when children whose intellectual process is not fully developed because they are children, they're in the process of becoming, what is it that we can do from wherever we sit as pastors, as church people, as women's groups? What is it that we can do to help them along the way? Not an easy question, but I do think there are good solutions out there for all of us. When we engage in goodness, we get healthier, we do better, we have more energy. I know Kathy Nolan, for a lot of years, worked at St. Leonard's Ministry in Chicago, helping formerly incarcerated men in prison to re-enter the society. And there was another place called Grace House for the women to re-enter into society. So there are good things that can be done. And when I was preparing for this and after our talk the other day, Andrea, I was thinking, what might we as Lenawee County come up, dream about something to improve society on some fashion to help people turn their lives into a new, better direction. And I know in some of my mental health work, we got grants. There was so much money, grant money out there. Did you know that? You want some money? Get it? Really, you really, really can. And the Hilton Foundation is a very good one to work with. So I'm just saying in what might transpire from tonight, something that could emerge in this location, in this county for people. And we all have energy, time, some different amounts, but we can do something. We can, wouldn't it be kind of neat for our area to be a gold star on something that hasn't even been thought of yet, but planting seeds like this toward human betterment? We have that potential, my friends. We really do. Next slide, please. And again, they talk about what is human trafficking. And they're trafficked for a variety of purposes. So commercial sex is huge. Agricultural work has already been mentioned. Housekeeping, that's been mentioned. They all share in the loss of one of the world's most cherished rights, and that is freedom. Because they're controlled and they're governed about their actions. And it says there's no one consistent face of a trafficking victim. Trafficked persons can be rich or poor, men or women, adults or children, and foreign nationals or U.S. citizens. And there was another case I'm familiar with where a group of high school boys were having a party, and some of the girls were there too. And 3 or 4 of the guys took one of the girlfriends up to the bedroom, and they were fooling around, playing around, took pictures. And the girl realized this was highly inappropriate, should get in trouble. But the guys took pictures of her and said, if you say anything, we're going to spread these pictures around high school. So she was terrified. She didn't want her parents to see this, didn't want her parents to know what she was involved in, et cetera, et cetera. So over the course of 6 to 8 months, they used this as a threat. And these were high school kids. So people use creative derogatory ways of getting their needs and their distorted thoughts. And so that saying, if you see something, say something. And it's far better to deal with your parents when you go home and say, Mom or Dad, I really blew it. But she got in deeper and deeper and deeper. Then she had major mental health. And some of you, I'm sure, would deal with a person like that in treatment for a long time. So we look at different scenarios. Another one up there, there is no one consistent face of a trafficker. Traffickers include a wide range of criminal operators, including individual pimps, small family or large businesses, loose-knit decentralized criminal networks, and international organized criminal syndicates.
Mr. Pat, I have a question on that.
Sure, Mary?
In the media, traffickers always seem to be male.
Yeah.
So what is in the male psyche that makes them feel like they have control over a woman's body? What is that?
I wondered the same. That's a great question. Does anybody have the answer? Please, Kathy.
Well, I think one of the things is that from the beginning of time, women have been considered property. Children are considered property of the man. So that kind of attitude, if you believe that someone is your property, then you have the right to use that person any way that you want. And so I think, and many of our laws are they're changing, but for a long time, you think a man could rape his wife, and that was considered legal. Think about how if you think about slavery, it was about property, ownership of property. And that continues. That's the mentality. It's the basis of patriarchy. And it continues. And I think that's part of the problem, why men tend to, although women are also involved in human trafficking too, but men view their women and children as their property. And the law upholds that.
Thank you. Thank you. Does that give a little insight, Mary?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get that, but maybe that hasn't been the case in the United States in decades.
Mm-hmm.
When is this mentality going to change?
Well, something I've been thinking about, when a marriage occurs, whose name gets left off the paper? She becomes property.
Only if she chooses.
True. But don't you see that changing in society? More and more women are retaining their own or a hyphenated name. I'm seeing that more and more. Please. Go ahead.
I might be wrong, but sometimes I think way back, deep down, men are a little bit afraid that they might be a little bit not quite as strong as women actually are. And they may not realize it, but that might make them try to be dominant, to hold that down. And we seem to, hopefully we're getting stronger.
Yeah. No, when you see, go ahead. When you see a really good, healthy heterosexual relationship where both partners are equal, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. But we need more examples of that. Please.
Children's marriage. Females being married when they're teens. Parents allow it. It's happening. It's happening all over the United States. And I think that has to be stopped. That's going to make a big difference. And I want to just say one more thing since I'm standing up here. I worked for many years with teenagers, children, families. And one thing I learned, for those of you who are going to be working with people, with these children, time is probably the most important thing for them. That I would have a feeling that there was something wrong. I would go around it every other way I could find, couldn't get there. And then years would go by and that young person would come back and say, I want to tell you my story. I just had to wait. I had to be patient. So I had to say that.
No, thank you, because that is so true, that they want to get what is in out there. They need to tell their story and to trust in safe environments, clinical or mental health or group support or a teacher or somebody. Counselors and coaches play a very significant role in the minds, in the lives of young people, because I read a lot of biographies, and I recently read Tony Dungy and Steve Curry, and both of them talked about the most important thing they did as a coach was listen to their players. And it wasn't always about the sport. It was about life stuff. And so in light of your question, Mary, which I think is very, very rich and needs to be dealt with, how can we work together in unity toward betterment for all, for women, for men, for boys, and for girls? And I think, did you have a?
I just, well, I guess I had a question. You know, well, first of all, I want to thank you for what you were saying. I'm glad I know these signs. I wrote them all down. I travel I-80 a lot. My daughters both live right off of I-80, and those rest areas in Iowa are scary. I don't know why. Iowas are really remote. They're really scary. I drive them constantly, and we drive at really weird hours of the night to get to my children. And I've been suspicious a few times. This is a couple that's just in a fight, tired, or is there something off? And there, and there's signs everywhere in those bathrooms. Like you cannot escape it in those rest areas. There's, they're always telling you there's hotlines, please call if you see anything, but it's always been hard to know what I'm seeing. And so I thank you for those signs. I'm going to keep that in mind the next time I travel there. But I guess my question is, we're a high agricultural area. I used to work at one of the local farms when I was in high school. And, we have a lot of businesses around. How do we recognize that trafficking? How do we recognize, like, what are some of the signs? Like, I feel like, the first time I attended one of your panel discussions a few years ago during the pandemic, it was very enlightening to me because I only thought about trafficking as sex trafficking. My brain had not really processed it beyond that until that panel discussion. And I'm like, oh, this is going on. There's other, and I started researching it more because I was very curious, read about like a Comcast worker that was being trained because they go into houses and there's, there's people being, in a house, like kept in that house or in the confines of that house, and started researching that more. But I guess, how do we recognize it? Especially we are a high agricultural area. We have a lot of small businesses and large businesses in this area. How do we recognize trafficking in that respect?
Okay. And again, thank you for that question. And we have to train ourselves. And I know many of you have experience, so feel free to add to what I'm saying. We have to train ourselves to watch people. We can see behaviors. We can see people's actions or reactions or no actions to normal situations. And I am always concerned when somebody is very reticent to say anything, to contribute to a conversation, or if they put themselves down. that to me is very, very self-demeaning. Where along the way did they get the message that they don't count? And I do think in a lot of times, even in settings like you just described, in rural areas, if somebody is unhealthy intellectually and wants dominance over their workers, over their employees, I think wherever we can see things, we sometimes even have to say to people, is everything okay? Are you in a safe environment? Do you have someone you can talk with? And that's one of the things about our churches, our various denominations. And Andrea invited me to her church, and I'm going to go there one of these times at 11 o'clock on Sunday, because churches serve as a very profound, sacred, reverent place for people to get some of their needs met. And so sometimes people feel they can't say things. And they won't say things because they're afraid. And if they don't have any support, particularly in rural areas where the jobs aren't that prevalent, they got a job, they stay in it because they may be the sole support of their family or themselves. And does that?
Well, yes, and to go with that as well. I work at a school where we have a large Spanish speaking only population. So we have a large Spanish speaking population here. And, you know, would there ever be where it's a dominant because that person doesn't speak English and they can control? And how do we recognize that? Like that always worries me. And sometimes I sometimes wonder when I've seen some of such, things that like parents will tell me, and I'm like, I wonder if everything is on the up and up, and I don't know if they're being taken advantage of, or somebody is, if possibly they're being trafficked, and how do you see those signs? And I just think that's very valid, especially in this area, just because we do have such a large non-English speaking population here as well, and it concerns me.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that language differentiation, because we do have to have multilingual people working with populations so that they can be taught and told and trained that there are safe places for them, that they need to be able to go to someplace and say what's on their mind or in their experiences, because that is a very real thing when there's a dominance of language one over another. And I do know that as we look at various audiences, groups, different socioeconomic, different languages, different religions, different races, there is a misuse of power. But language is a huge. How many in here are bilingual?
I am.
Who said that?
I am Steve Gonzalez.
Oh, okay, great. But just look at here, how many of us do not. And Spanish was one of my minors, but I didn't do the best job in the world, and I regret it to this day.
Could I respond or piggyback off the last comment about Spanish speaking?
Please.
So I'm Steve Gonzalez. I am one of the graduation coaches at Springbrook Middle School. I had 11 years at the high school, and I think there's all sorts of concerns besides, as well as human trafficking, when it comes to the Spanish speaking population, especially when you get out there to the fields where a lot of workers are. But I do know that a lot of those workers now have switched over to be just males. And if there are families, they're pretty much living in a home that maybe a farmer owns or just on the outskirts within the city. But as far as like students and how do you tell, because it is tough to tell for anybody who might not be Spanish, because like some of our mannerisms and some of our things are different. And yes, it is a very male model role, whatever you want to call it, as far as how the family runs. But I guess, unfortunately, unless you're Spanish, unless you've been brought up to understand and see that, it would be very difficult. But I would just like to say, with the public schools, I know that we're about 30, a little bit over 30% Latinos. I just know that with communication, everything, new families, knowing that we have success coaches, ESL teachers, at least through the school system for Adrian, I can speak and say that it's pretty well covered.
Okay.
And s-
Thank you for.
And Steve is also a member of the Human Relations Commission.
Yes, good.
I just wanted to let you know.
Great, thank you, thank you. No, these
Thank you.
are, I like all of the variety of ways people are looking at this topic and subject. And it brings us back to what can we do right here, right now? This is all we have. So how are we going to impact? Can next slide, please? Just want to point out, again, there's, it's a federal law now. Isn't it amazing that we had to create a federal law to not destroy other human beings? I always find and look at some of our laws, it's most interesting. And there's force, fraud, and coercion, which are our key indicators when somebody is being trafficked and outside of there. You know what? We're smart enough to see stuff. We know when we see a relationship or two people together or three and something's not right. You know in your gut. So we need to look at that. Next slide, please. And again, Michigan law, I'm proud to say that we have a Teresa Flores Act. When you think about that, somebody's life experience resulted in a law toward human betterment, to a law toward the safety. So we have things happening in our state, and we want to. I know Teresa Flores has been here in Lenawee County, and I know I've heard her in various places, but we need to look at people who've stepped out of their boundary to educate us, to help us understand. Next slide, please. This typology of modern slavery is, it's very, very sad that the federal government, not sad that they got involved, but that they got the statistical knowledge and are putting it out in front of all of us. This is our time to respond, to do that. And there are many, many, like I said, go on YouTube, type in videos, type in laws, type in PowerPoints, and you have access along with these brochures of places where you can immediately find and surface information. Next slide, please. Look at the types of human trafficking. Does any of that jump out at you? You're surprised at it? Okay, I will. Recreational facilities, those are the least common, but it does exist there. Healthcare, forestry and logging, carnivals, remote interactive sexual acts, factories and manufacturing, commercial cleaning services, arts and entertainment, illicit activities. What might that be? Pardon?
Prostitution.
Prostitution, sure. Prostitutes are also trafficked. Landscaping, hotels and hospitalities, those are biggies. Construction, health and beauty services, and that was already mentioned with the services that are rendered. Personal sexual servitude, agricultural animal husbandry, peddling and begging, restaurant and food services. That pretty much covers a lot of stuff going on, but they're not all involved in trafficking, but we need to have an awareness. Traveling, sales and cruise, pornography, bars, strip clubs, in cantinas, domestic work, residential, outdoor solicitation, illicit massage, health and beauty, escort services. And the most common is that escort services. And even look, I must have read 4 to 5 books on that Jeffrey Epstein and Giselle, what's her name? Ghislaine Maxwell. And again, that was a combination of a couple. And they did it on certain islands and took young women. And a lot of times they will go after young women who don't have economic means. And you know what? $200 is a lot of money to a high school kid for about 10 minutes of work, which Jeffrey Epstein had a whole slew. So, and these are very worldwide people. And so we have to look at how we treat one another. And I don't care what you do in the world. I don't care what your position. We have no right to be derogatory or name calling to other people. None of us is better than anybody else. And when we see that and hear that in our media, that saddens me. That really saddens me. So we look at some of these situations where trafficking has occurred, does occur. So if you see something and you don't even want to get involved, do report it and leave that up to law enforcement, because they do respond and they will. Next slide, please. And again, we've seen this power wheel in signs of human trafficking, in labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Trafficking for the sole purpose of sexual misuse is huge, and labor trafficking, bringing people in who so desperately need monies to feed their families. And so that's and very often, I was reading a book from a church on the East Coast. They went to Sudan and they had a beautiful choir for little children, boys choir. And the pastor brought, through the local village, brought 16 of the little boys over to America with the promise of they would sing. And they did sing, but he confiscated their money, limited their food intake, would not told them to write home, but never mailed the letters. And when parents wrote to them, never gave the letters to the kids. So you have people misuse labor trafficking. Eventually, it was discovered and found out, but we have some international things happening where children are victimized. Next slide, please. And again, who is vulnerable? A substance abuse concern, runaway homeless youth, that is our chart says, recent migration and relocation, unstable housing, mental health concerns. In labor trafficking, recent migration location, same thing, unstable housing, criminal records, criminal history, physical health concerns, and substance abuse concerns. So we have a lot going on in our society that we're a part of, And we have to have awareness of human trafficking and labor trafficking. Please. You have sex trafficking and labor trafficking, sex trafficking, intimate partner, familial, job offer, advertisement, posing as a benefactor, false promises and fraud. And the people doing the work do not get the money. A lot of times, a pimp or a trafficker will promise them something and retain the money, so they don't have a way or a means by which to leave the environment. And then the labor and trafficking, again, job offers, false promises, smuggling related, familial, posing as a benefactor. So they get people into jobs and then they confiscate their passport, their license, any identification, so they have nowhere to go. I lived in St. Clair Shores for 25 years before I moved here. In one of our very, very affluent suburbs, There was a couple. They were both physicians. And they brought a woman from the Eastern European countries to be their nanny. And she turned out to be trafficked, sexually misused by both husband and wife. And everything was confiscated. She had nowhere to get out. But the people in the neighborhood saw her behavior and knew it was odd. She originally said she was here to be the nanny for this couple and go to school, and they began to see, because they reported it, and these two doctors are now in prison.
Do you think that is there a rise, or is there just more awareness now? And with the internet and the resources we have, that the word is getting out more?
Good question. I think it's both and. I think the fact that we're talking about it more, we're getting the word out, we're being educated around it. But the fact that human trafficking has replaced drug trafficking, there is more money to be made. And if we've got a disturbed mind of somebody whose sexual needs or gratifications have to be met in such inappropriate ways, that plays a part too. So we have some disturbance we all have to work on. So can we count on everybody in Lenawee County here to be part of the solution? We've all got a part of all of this. Please, next slide. And again, sex trafficking and labor trafficking, you see a crossover, particularly the labor trafficking, withholding pay, excessive work hours. Some have had to work 12, 14, and 16 hours a day. A lot of times it's in agriculture. They're exhausted and then they have to repeat it the next. A threat to report them to immigration. And it's awful to have to think that you might have to go back. Verbal abuse and withholding and denying needs. Is this evening a pleasant evening for you, learning all this? Please, next slide. And there's some human trafficking myths. It says it's always a violent crime, and it isn't. It's a misuse and a matter of control. All humans trafficking involves commercial sex. Only undocumented foreign nationals get trafficked in the United States. Not true. Why do you say no?
Because I've heard of stories of young girls that have been betrayed.
Okay. Absolutely. Absolutely. Only women and girls can be victims and survivors of sex trafficking. The male population also. Human trafficking involves moving, traveling, or transporting a person across state or national borders. It can be right in our own hometown. And it is. Labor trafficking is only primarily a problem in developing countries. Not true. And traffickers target victims they don't know. They also traffic and target victims they do know. They look at homes. They look and see what is or is not out and available. And we look at that and we think, how and why did we get to this point in our society? It scares me. 5 minutes? Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Please. We got 5 minutes.
All right, I'll be brief. Just going back to what the mayor was asking in regards to agriculture, I think education is a big thing that has been pushed all around, and I think it's important. I know a lot of the state entities have been doing a lot more training on looking more beneath the surface of seeing what could be. And also, I think looking at these myths and understanding that, it's not always what you think in that regards. I think education, again, is the key to it all. And I think something that I'm taking for myself is in this uprising of technology, we tend to look at our phones more than we look at each other. And obviously, if I don't know that this is a sign because I'm worried about the next update on a status, then I'm not able to be alert. So I think something I'm taking for myself is to be alert of those things and maybe spend less time on technology, because if we're understanding that a lot of the children that are being targeted are because of the lack of attention, I think that's an educational component we all need to take and be aware of, to be more alert, to be more present in our children's life and in adults' life, and individuals that have mental difficulties that feel that they're not wanted. And of course, then if someone that shows them a little bit of attention, to them, that is a want, even if it's not always the right one. And so back to agriculture, I think ideally we do have a lot of information that has recently uprised with information both Spanish and English, and just letting them know, unfortunately, because of the fact that they are in situations that in their mind, again, they think, well, it's not as bad as back home. And so unfortunately, there are those situations. But again, being more present to saying, okay, you know what, let's just figure this out and see, even if it doesn't come of anything, but at least I did my part, and my conscience can be clear, you know, by making, like you said, a call to the police and allowing law enforcement to do their part, and building that trust back into law enforcement and understanding that they are here to protect and serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Those are very fine comments. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Anybody else?
One of the things that I noticed that was missing from there, there's going to be a huge problem. It's already a problem international. Is trafficking for body parts, especially kidneys, heart, and they're doing it two ways. They're taking advantage of people who are poor, and maybe they were selling one kidney. But then there's other people they are kidnapping. And this began to become a huge market here in the United States.
Yeah.
So that's gonna be a classification that you're gonna have to add. In the next few years, they're probably going to outreach sexual trafficking.
Yes. Thank you very much for that insight. Very valuable, very valuable. Appreciate that. I'm gonna wrap this up with one quick tale that has impacted me. I did a talk in South Africa, Johannesburg, and we went to where Mr. Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years for what he thought. And my talk was on post-traumatic stress disorder, because they have lots of good services there, but they're missing something for adolescents. But Mr. Nelson Mandela, when he was freed from Robben Island and angry at what was done unto him for 27 years, he said, I cannot take my anger out of this jail cell if I'm going to work for my people, for my country. So he made a conscious decision to leave his anger for what was done unto him in that jail cell. And we know the rest is history of how he did, and he changed his country. So we have wonderful role models, and I'm charging all of us to think and see. And what is it that we might move forward with here in our county? And I'm going to leave that in the hands of our mayor and her wonderful group here who leads us. But this is very important to talk about, and I thank you for being part of this. So together we can do so much more. Okay?
This has been an outstanding presentation. Before everybody leaves, we just like to thank you so much for your knowledge and your time and your energy that you put into making sure that we learn what we need to learn and then act on what we have gained. I am so excited about bringing her back again to do part 2 or 3 or whatever it takes and what is necessary, maybe at a different time of the year that people actually can
more people can come, or we can have it at another venue. But I just like to say there's several areas of the human body and the human mind that can't even comprehend this type of trafficking. But when you think about what you said in the beginning about slavery, this mirrors all of slavery and then some. Only thing, people are not hanging in trees or not being killed because, as Bishop spoke and said about the body parts, and the value of the body is not the same as it used to be. We don't care enough about each other to stop people from doing what they're doing when we see it and we don't say anything. It's so important for you to keep beating that voice. Winnie Mandela and her husband both inspired a lot of people by their strength, the power that they continue to have even after they were out of prison. See, we have to start focusing on not what happened to me, but what happened to me, how do I use that to help someone else not have to suffer what I have had to suffer? It's so important that this community starts thinking about someone besides yourself. The one most important thing that we can do is show and tell. It's something that we're teaching. Show people who you are before you start telling them who you are. Telling me something and me actually taking it in and doing something about it is totally different. We talk a lot, so it's time now for some action. And I just want to stand and applaud you for coming today. Thank you so much. This is our town. You're so right. And I just like to thank all.
Yeah, I want to know, I was part of this community for many years. And was part of the human trafficking. And they had offered, and they were going to look into it, to get me into the training that they were giving to help, as being that I'm Hispanic, to help a little bit more. I want to know, where do we stand on that? Is that still available? And how can I go about?
You give me your name.
Yes. Okay. Sounds.
Good question. Thank you. Is there someone else that has a question or would like to make a statement?
Or anybody on Zoom as well?
All right, again, we'd like to say thank you to our guest speaker. She is phenomenal. I really appreciate getting to know her. And we were neighbors. We never did get to meet each other until now. But God has a way of bringing you around, bringing you back towards each other at the most appropriate time. So we just like to say thank you again, and I want to close it out. If there's no other community comments on Zoom. All right, thank you so much for coming.
I'm tired. I haven't been home since like 7 o'clock this morning.